So we're going to get started today. My name is Breland Blake. I'm an application engineer here at Design Point. And today I'm going to show you some successful routes with SOLIDWORKS routing. All right, today our agenda, we're going to go over some routing, just the fundamentals. We're going to create and we're going to edit some pipe routes. We'll show you how to do that. We'll run through just some of the settings with routing. Also the design library structure and how we can copy and edit some of our routes. And we'll be using some design library components. So for the primary lunch and learn that we're doing today, I'll be showing you through PowerPoint. But if anyone has any questions, we'll hold those off to the end. If you just want to go ahead and raise your hand in the chat and we can address some of your questions if we have time today. If not, then you can all contact me through technical support, and we can discuss some of those questions as well to the follow-up to our lunch and learn here. Okay. So some of you may be experienced routers. Some of you may be some novice, but we'll go over through some of the route components today. Let's see if we could do a hand participation. Does everyone use routing on a daily basis? Anyone here? Okay. All right, so what is routing? So routing, it involves the creation of either electrical wiring, cabling, electrical conduit, tubing, piping, routes, and also some solid parts in the assembly. What that means is there's various components and there's various disciplines within routing. So you can have anywhere from your route flanges to the actual route piping or tubing or even electrical runs as well. That's all included into your assembly. So we'll go over that a little bit later with how the file structure is developed. All routing has to begin with an assembly. So we'll start in an assembly and we'll bring in various components, and then that will begin the route. And SOLIDWORKS automatically is going to start organizing some of your file structure in your design tree underneath those assemblies. So routing can be used in the piping discipline, whether you have any kind of sanitary piping, process piping, or even food applications. And that can show, what it's going to do is going to give you a live representation of that pipe, electrical wire or conduit or tubing pipe run that you're trying to convey to a customer in your project. Routing is very helpful because it's going to give you the true representation in an assembly. So you can route your pipes through walls and you can plan out all of your routes before any kind of fabrication has begun. And also one of the most beneficial things is it's going to give you the true lengths of all of those runs, the section runs. Okay. And the types of routes that we're going to go over today. So we'll go over piping. There's tubing. That's something that's used more in the kind of smaller applications of things. It gives you the ability to use tubing. However, it's one of the things that I don't see too many of our customers using, but it's a functionality and it's available also with the routing package. Piping and electrical is one of the most popular route types that you typically would use. But also with routing, there's also, you can route with electrical, cable and wires, and also electrical conduit. And the conduit is going to be almost like a thin pipe that goes around your wires for your wire runs, right? So creating custom route components. There's various different ways how you can do that. What I would suggest, and what also the manual suggests, if any of you have ever taken into the training, our design library is brought to us with just standard components for the for some of our piping routes, tubing routes, and electrical. There's various components that are already modeled up that are already going to have some of the intelligence attached to them for our routing to begin, so we can click and drag and utilize some of those routing components. What I would suggest you use whenever you're starting a route or whenever you start, so whenever you're starting to route, is use the standard design library components that I already laid out for you. They work great. They come with your standard installation with SOLIDWORKS. So I would use those first, leave those as just the default components, because you could always go back to those if there's any change that you like to make, or if there's any custom components that you want to make from them. Change the file structure name and name it to another location, but always leave your design library components as default. We're also going to go over that a little bit later too, and I can show you some of the file structure as well. But that's one of the number one ways. That's your option one for creating any kind of a route component. So there are already default components there, and what you can do is just take one of those components and do a save as, and you would go through the routing library manager to save it out and then change the file name to create your own component. That's one way that you can create a custom component. The second way you can do it is you can create models from scratch. So any kind of SOLIDWORKS models that you start modeling, they could be any kind of part. You can even make, you start from an assembly. You just have to save it out as a part just to reduce the size. But then you can use some of those components to create your C points and some of your route points. And process that all of these components will have to go through the routing library manager in order to be route components. And then you can put them into your design library or onto your Vault. All depends on the company standards. Right? All right, so the first thing, like we just talked about here, the first option, you do your file save as your existing route components. You'd go to your design library, which I show here on the right-hand side. Notice the file structure as we're going through piping. You have various options underneath piping in your design library, and your design library is going to be constructed of all your disciplines, and everything is organized from your standard installation. And you can utilize some of these components as a drag and drop option into some of your assemblies to start beginning your route. To start beginning your route, these components are already defined and already processed through the routing library manager. So these components in your design library underneath routing are already ready to use, ready to route. So you would need to turn in your routing add-on into your add-on options to activate your route menu. And then you're going to have different disciplines at the top of your menu, and then you can drag and drop and begin your routes. Okay, so if you hear me go on to say about the routing library manager, any component that is a routing component that has already been processed through has already have a C point established, which you see at the front of your screen, right in the center of those points. They're standing in as a routing C point. And your routing C point is going to be ultimately your starting point, and then you can process all the rest of those through, and then your route will actually then begin. All right, can everyone here, just want to make sure everyone can see my screen here that I'm showing currently right now. So where we are, now that everyone can see my screen and can hear me, we are on a, we are just opened up SOLIDWORKS here. We have a component that's dropped in from our design library, which is a flange. It's just a simple slip-on flange. This slip-on flange has already been processed through our routing library manager. This is because it's a default routing component. And when it's processed through the routing component wizard, it already established a C point and it's R points. So it's saved out to our design library, and now it's ready to be used as a routing component. So you can drag it and drop it from our design library on the right-hand side and drop it right into our assembly. Now from our design library on the right-hand side, you can see the file structure. We have piping, and as you can see, the flange folder is highlighted, and that's what's opened, and that was dragged and dropped over. Now to create a custom component from our design library here, what you would do is you would take a standard component make any kind of change that you would like to it, and save as a different name than the design library component. So you always want to practice keeping your design library components fresh. You do not want to manipulate those. If you can use those, but just remember to save as to start creating your custom components. All right. To do so there, you would just do a save as, and you would save that back and create a new folder into your design library. So you could always click and use that that component or whichever component in your routing discipline. Okay. All right, so the option 2 is you can create a model from scratch. If you created a model from scratch, what you would do is you would model up a SOLIDWORKS component, any kind of component, or you can even use an assembly, save that assembly out as a part. Once it's all complete, you want to make sure that your routing components aren't too detailed, as you can see just from the preview in our routing library manager. Everything is, it's a standard component of a valve, but there's not any kind of special effects. There's not too many fillets or rounds to it. You want to make sure that it's not too detailed, because once you start dropping in numerous routing components, you can start slowing down your assembly and slowing down your performance as well. So you want to make sure it's not too detailed. So remove any kind of fillets or radiuses if possible. All right. And just to roll back here, this is our routing library manager. This is the interface when you open up a routing component. When you're in a assembly, if you want to make a change to a routing component, what you would have to do is click on the component and open that actual part. So you want to go out of your assembly and go to the part level. From here, if we were going to start any kind of a brand new route component from scratch, we already modeled up a component. Then you want to open up your routing library manager from your routing tools. And then in your routing component wizard, as you can see at the top of your screens, there's numerous buttons here. You want to be in the routing component wizard. This is essentially your first step here. So you want to specify your route type, and then also specify your component type. Now the route type is going to be the different disciplines within your routing types that you have the option to pick from. And then your component type just a little bit more defined, and from the drop down, it's going to give you a little bit more usability for saving out those components. Once you do that, you want to go to your next step, and then you would go down through your various steps on the left-hand side, and you want to specify your points and your geometry and also your mate reference, and then go through the following steps. You want to make sure that you save your component and get all the way to the last step, which is going to show you how to or where to save your component to. And just before the end of the presentation, we'll go over a little bit more of the file structure of how SOLIDWORKS suggests that you save your routing components and where you save those to. Okay. Now, let's say we already created a route and we started routing one of our assemblies. And as you can see here with the tank, there's a slip-on flange at the top. That's just going to a pipe going to another flange. So once you create that, that is going to maintain a file structure in your design tree. It's going to start a subassembly for that route. Underneath that subassembly, you're going to have your various routing components, and also your routing parts, and also your sketch, which is going to be your route. In order for you to make any kind of changes to your route and go back in and manipulate that route geometry, you have to click on it and edit your route. Underneath edit route, you have some various other options as well, which is going to house your route properties and some other data that's associated to your routing assembly. All right. And whenever you drag and you drop in some of your routes, I would strongly utilize 3D sketches or even auto routes, which is going to make your life a lot easier, and then you can manipulate some of your routes from there. Okay. Now with using your design library content, this is what we've been stressing the whole time. And with your design library content here, on the left-hand side in the first image, you're going to see your design library underneath the SOLIDWORKS content. It's going to have a drop down for your routing and then the various disciplines underneath those. Now with your disciplines underneath, these are all just your standard locations, and you can create new folder structure within this folder structure, or you can create a new design library or even on the Vault. It all depends on each company's standards and what they want to specify. And then you have a breakdown from there. So if you have a custom component, you might want to name that custom component and then have a breakdown for why that is a custom component. You know, so it's a parent to child sort of a system that's going down. As you can see farther on the right-hand side with the SOLIDWORKS content, how it goes from routing down to your different areas where your components are saved and stored underneath piping, as you can see, and then you can see your different disciplines underneath there. So that's how I would start structuring some of your design library content. And you can drag and drop some of those components. Once those components are put into your design library from your routing component wizard, each one of those components are going to give you a confirmation at the end to let you know that they've been saved into the correct location. Okay, so that is very important to do because you want to make sure that you saved out your component and saved out all your hard work, and you can go back and reuse some of those components. And I would save those to your design library, whether that is on your local machine or whether that's mapped from your Vault. But you want to have the file structure from the parent to child, okay, in that structure. And it will even specify this in your SOLIDWORKS routing manual. If any of you have any kind of SOLIDWORKS routing manual, if you've been through our training, in the back of the book, every book is a little bit different with the pages, but it's most likely in the back of your lesson 10. Is SOLIDWORKS will give you a structure of how you should structure your design library components. It even says the failure to follow this procedure will cause problems within your routing and your general assemblies because the file structure is different. And in order for those to be routing components and utilized in the right way, they have to have the top level of that discipline and then a breakdown from there. And I would suggest putting those in your design library to keep them nice and organized. With your design library, as you know, you can use routing components, but you could also use some parts as well to incorporate into some of your routing assemblies. What that may mean is you may have a tank or you might have another component that you're routing to, and then we can organize some of our routing structure the same way as well. Okay, so with that being said, we can go over some of the tips that I may have to help you guys out. Feel free to contact me after any of these after our lunch and learn for, we can discuss through some of your other some of your subjects, or you can just tell me about some of your routes, some of the projects that you're working on, and I can help you out with some of your suggestions as well. Some of the tips I have for routing, I would utilize display states. Display states is going to be a huge benefit to you, because your display state, you can take a display state and hide out some of your components to make your visual subassembly that you're editing a lot easier, and not so much lines in the background that you can possibly snap on or establish a meet to. So that's a great way to use display states with your routing. It will help out a lot. Another tip that I would have, which I use and I love to use, if you have any kind of a routing plane, for example, let's go back with these slides here. So With this particular tank that we're looking at here, on top of that tank, we have a slip-on flange, and then we have another slip-on flange. And our routing assembly is going to be what's highlighted in blue. So when that route is activated, we can establish a 3D sketch that can control that, and we can also establish our dimensions that can control that route as well. And you can control that that sketch with dimensions, or you can control that sketch that is going to drive the route with planes. So let's say that you have a top plane and you want the horizontal portion of that tube to be a certain elevation off your ground from your tank. You can establish a plane and and change some of your change your dimensions and whatever pipe that you have mated to that plane. So you can set all of your elevations for a certain distance, and depending on whatever project, I'm sure you'll figure out the plug-in of how to apply some of those planes in your own project. And that could also go from your front to back reference as well, with the with your top, front, or right planes into your subassembly. That will also help you control some of your routes to keep everything nice and clean with your pipe runs. Also, with either pipe runs or with electrical, you can create you have virtual components, which is going to control the pipes and which direction they're going to go. So you can maintain a virtual component that is going to house that's going to hold your route structure to a certain location. Let's say we want this pipe to be a certain distance off the wall. We can establish that with a plane or with a virtual component as well. All right. And also another tip that I have too is whenever you're using auto route, and auto route would be you can drag and drop a flange on one side and drag and drop a flange to another side, and then you would use your auto route to auto route that pipe. SOLIDWORKS is going to generate an automatic pipe route for you as a suggestion. You don't have to use that suggestion. You can sit there and you can use some of the other options within your routing menu, and you could freehand that as well. But with using some of the suggested routes, when you modify those, you can use those suggested routes to a certain location or get it close to where you want to be. And then from there, then you can click and drag and move the component around, because I'm working with, essentially they're like working with 3D sketches that's going to be driving that routing line that could be kind of cumbersome to work with for some people. So get it to the correct location, correct orientation that you want it to, and then you can manipulate from there from your freehand. Okay. Also, depending on any kind of discipline that you're working with, whenever you're dragging and dropping components in, let's say it's a flange or let's say it's a connector, there's various options as well. You utilize some of your quick control tools with your shift, holding shift down, and with your arrow keys to turn some of your routing components around to the correct orientation that you like to place those. That's another tip that I have. And there's some other ways, more advanced ways that we could use some of the mates as well. We'll discuss that at an individual basis. That's something that's more complex. And from there, I hope you enjoyed the lunch and learn. If any of you have any questions, you could raise your hand. Maybe we could address a few of those now, or if not, then feel free to contact me and we can discuss some of those over technical support. Hopefully with some of these tips here, you can be successful with creating some successful routes, whether it's piping, tubing, or electrical. Give another moment here to see if anyone else has any questions. Okay. If not, if anyone doesn't have any questions, please feel free to contact us here at Design Point. We'll be happy to help you out with any further questions or with any projects that you may have on a question basis. Okay. I'd like to thank you everyone for joining today, and I hope everyone has a great weekend.